Good afternoon, and welcome to the second meeting of the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council 8, which I formally declare to be open. I ask that everyone turn off your video and microphone unless you're speaking. I would like to start by welcoming two new members to CSRIC 8, Cicely Wolf of the U.S. Geological Survey and Craig Hodan of the National Weather Service of NOAA. An updated list of the CSRIC membership is on the website. Today, we will first hear from CSRIC 8 co-chair Billy Bob Brown of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and then we will hear from each of the 6 working group chairs and co-chairs who will announce. If anyone has on their microphone, could you please mute it? Thank you. And then we will hear from each of the 6 working group chairs, co-chairs who will announce their membership and their work plans for the coming months. Billy Bob?
Thank you, and I'd like to welcome all the members of the working groups and members of CSRIC to today's meeting. Thank you for all of your sacrifices in participating in this important work. It seems like every single week we find new challenges to national security and homeland security that demonstrate the importance of the work that you all are doing to try and improve and make recommendations to improve resilience and security of our communications infrastructure. With that, I am looking forward to today's report out, and I want to say thank you in advance for all of the great effort and the work that you all have done in assembling the working groups.
Brian and Travis, are you ready?
Hi, this is Brian Daly. Yes.
Great.
So this is the readout from Working Group 1, the 5G signaling protocol security. This is Brian Daly of AT&T. Travis Russell of Oracle is the co-lead of this group. Next slide, please. So as a background, we've been directed to examine and address security vulnerabilities associated with the newly adopted 5G signaling protocol, HTTP2. We've also want to confirm vulnerabilities and identify other vulnerabilities that have already been identified, and also provide recommendations on how to remediate the risks associated with HTTP2 and prevent them from carrying over to HTTP3 in the next release of the protocol. Next slide, please. Our objectives, the FCC has learned of 4 main vulnerabilities and attack vectors related to HTTP2. These include the slow read attacks, which call on malicious client to read responses very slowly, HPAC bombs, dependency cycle attacks, and stream multiplexing abuse. Our task is to research these as well as identify any other vulnerabilities and attack vectors identified by the industry, and we'll be utilizing industry SMEs and working group member expertise in order to help with this research. Next slide, please. The members of the working group are listed here. I won't read through those, but we do have a good subject matter expertise across the industry, as noted here. Next slide. We also have a number of alternates that have been identified that will assist with the working group tasks and activities. These are additional subject matter experts that will be brought in to address some of the tasks that we have before us. Next slide, please. As far as our deliverables and schedules, we already held 1 meeting, and we do plan on working group virtual meetings initially bi-weekly that will be scheduled after the first of the year. And again, the task will be to research and examine the security vulnerabilities and attack vectors and confirm the initial set of vulnerabilities and identify others. Our first report is due in September of 2022, which will be on those security vulnerabilities in HTTP2. And we also have our second report in June of 2023 on best practices to mitigate vulnerabilities in HTTP2 and also in HTTP3. So with that, that's the working group 1 report. Travis, anything you want to add?
Nope, thank you. Covered it all, Brian. Thanks.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, we can move on to working group 2. Mike and George, please.
Hi. Hi, yeah, it's Mike Barnes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, yeah, Mike Barnes. My co-chair is George Woodward. If you can go to the next slide. And next slide, please. This is just covering the background of our working group. It's the same information that's provided by the FCC. Our goal is basically security, reliability, interoperability of Open RAN radio access network and equipment. And so it's a pretty broad area. And I'll talk more in a minute about how we're going about that. So if you can go to the next slide. Our objectives, there's a couple of objectives identified by CSRIC VIII, and we'll build on, and you can read it, but we can build on and expand the exploration of the development and deployment challenges facing ORAN, and the increased threat attack surface and best how to mitigate this. And then we want to support the FCC in their goals of developing and deploying secure, open, interoperable networks when the FCC participates in standard setting bodies, for example, 3GPP. Next slide. Here's our working group members, and we really have George and I both discussed this. We have a really strong set of subject matter experts here on the team. So we have a really good set of members who are already starting to contribute to the discussion. Yeah, we did have our first meeting last week, and I'll talk more about our upcoming meeting at the last slide. The working group alternates are listed here. And next slide. So our upcoming meeting is January 11th. That'll be our second working group meeting. And then our paper is due on the December, a report on the challenges to the development of ORAN technology and recommendations on how to overcome them. And is there one final slide, or is that it? There is, yeah. So the agenda for the next meeting will be our working group members, or subject matter experts in-house, if you will, on the working group, will present an overview of Open RAN for the team, members of the team that are not familiar with some of the concepts. And then we'll also discuss the potential topics to include in the paper. What are the hot issues that the working group team wants to discuss? And that's our presentation. Any questions?
Yes, I do have a question. This is Master Razai. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I sit on the Enduring Security Framework that just recently put a group together around addressing ORAN challenges, threats, and scalability issues. And then, of course, there's the ORAN Alliance, where industry is working together, and it has a particular subgroup, security group. How are you guys intending to kind of maybe correlate or ensure that we either work together or don't duplicate effort?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and yeah, we are coordinating. We are some of our members are involved in the working group, are involved in these alliance groups and these other bodies. We also have essentially that's how we're handling it. We do not want to just duplicate the information that's already there. I think there is a lot of research, and there will be some overlap, I'm sure. But our goal isn't just to report on what's already being done. We want to hopefully add some value, from the working group. But yeah, we are tied in to these groups from Avenir, which is my company, and Ericsson. We have Ericsson and other companies that are involved as suppliers. Of course, we have some telecom operators as well as other industries in the working group that are aware of this. So that's what I think we're okay on that.
And Mike specifically, and George, what I'm looking for is like, what will we leverage in terms of what they've done or what we understand ESF is doing, and what would this group specifically focus on, right?
Right. We don't know that yet. That's what we'll start.
We don't know that yet, but that would be okay. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll start tackling that. Yeah, in January with our second meeting, we'll start going over what what is of interest to the team. And like I said, we have a pretty good set of subject matter experts, and I think we'll be able to pick good topics. Like, for example, building on even the 5G Americas, which at least 3 of us in our working group were members.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we'll be okay on this, not just, rehash what other people are saying.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Good question. Thanks. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. Suzanne, I think we're set for working group 2.
Great, thank you so much. That was a good question and answer on how you all are going to approach this. And next we will hear from working group 3, Michaela and John.
Great, thanks. This is John Rose, CTO of Dell Technologies, along with my co-chair Michaela from Microsoft. Yeah, if we jump to the first slide, or next slide, I guess it is. Working group 3 has a specific focus on virtualization within the 5G environment. There are a number of let's call it related activities to the overall CSRIC charter. The high points for us, though, are obviously creating and developing thoughts around how vendor agnostic horizontal solutions for 5G can be promoted to foster a broader ecosystem and a superior 5G environment, despite the increasing attack surfaces that get presented as you open the architectures. So very much a focus on virtualization. The specific work tends to orient towards a number of areas, including recommendations on which funds could be made available to promote virtualized environments, as they are essentially a new paradigm that needs to pull in a new ecosystem and expand the telecom environment. Additionally, while virtualization is a well understood term, it has not widely proliferated into the RAN specifically. And so we're going to look at overcoming the obstacles to the availability of virtualized central units, distributed units, potentially radio units, and along the way, try to look at ways to increase vendor diversity and encourage interoperability. Obviously, given the breadth of this, we're not trying to duplicate the work going on within the various standards organizations and technical efforts, but we do believe that they may not necessarily be fully aligned because virtualization crosses over between traditional telecom standards like 3GPP and ETSI and IT and open source projects, which typically aren't contemplated in most telecom discussions. So we're planning on looking at, trying to find those areas where things such as or security risks could manifest because of the virtualization. Things like API security as a concept, because the APIs are clearly not just purely telecom, they touch IT and cloud, and looking at those areas, trying to identify other ones like it, may give some guidance about how we can increase the overall robustness of the total virtualized environment. Our scope, because virtualization is a very complex term, we've had a lot of discussions so far about where the boundaries are. Clearly, it does include the virtualization of telecom functions like CUs, DUs, possibly RUs, and the core. We had a long discussion about, our bias on discussing virtualization will be more around the horizontal layering and abstraction of the system versus opening a specific interface. Sometimes people use the word virtualization to describe something like eCSRIC. We are not sure that is in scope, and we'll work through it. If it's relevant to the overall adoption of virtualization, of course, we'll consider it, but we're going to resist the urge to duplicate the effort of Open RAN and the Open RAN Alliance, for instance, on the embedded interfaces. But that'll be a discussion, and we'll see where it goes with the working group and outside experts. Next chart, please. So our objectives, we have quite a number of them. To look at this area, we really do need to be fairly comprehensive. We believe that there are significant best practices and lessons learned in virtualization not related to telecom. So it would be foolish to just look in the telecom sector. So we're going to look more broadly at how virtualization has proliferated across the tech stack, what lessons learned, what best practices, and which ones could be applied to the telecom ecosystem, and ultimately to create a more secure system. And this does include both the operation of virtualization and the supply chain around it. Because of the breadth of the topic, we already have a relatively long list of researchers, technologists, thought leaders, standards organizations, and we will spend a fairly extensive amount of time trying to get a more complete set of points of view around virtualization and its application to both efficiency, but also the security of systems it's applied to. We will absolutely try to organize what we learn into best practices, or at least identify the best practices that are out there. It would be, unfortunate if telecom did not adopt best practices that had already proliferated the use of virtualization in other industries, but we'll try to map them to the 5G network and how they could be used there, at least at a high level. We are hoping to get results from real-world test labs and real-world deployments, because there are examples of virtualized environments, albeit limited, but they're out there, and we'll hopefully learn from some of those early adopters. And obviously, we're having a very open discussion, given the breadth of this topic, about which are the areas specifically technically where there are issues that need to be addressed. We may not come up with an answer for those issues, but for instance, identifying API security as one that must be, a priority for people building highly distributed virtualized environments would seem to be a good recommendation. From a advice and recommendation perspective, we expect that we'll provide some advice around how funding and industry catalysts can occur, how the standards organizations may be able to operate better or should be coordinated. Integration best practices will clearly accumulate a lot of interesting best practices as we do the evaluation of data and gathering insights, and that hopefully will be organized and shared. And then obviously ecosystem structure, because again, virtualization is not a purely telecom thing. In fact, it originated outside of telecom and is now being used by it and is dependent on external ecosystems. So we'll hopefully have a better set of recommendations about how to contemplate the virtualized ecosystem. A number of reports should come out of this, including how virtualized technologies could be used to promote 5G security and reliability. And then also, report recommending for the role of the FCC in promoting the use of virtualization technology. Next chart, please. Our methodology is very similar to the other working groups. The first part of our exercise is, establishing a set of high-level goals, which we've just talked about, but then really moving into information gathering. We expect it to be quite large in terms of the number of people. We have a cadence already established to, on I think a bi-weekly basis, start to bring in SMEs, industry organizations, even specific vendors with experience in this space. Clearly, that will be a very wide net. We'd encourage anyone in the CSRIC community who has ideas about where the broad insights around virtualization in use in systems like this exists. But we do already have a pretty extensive list. I don't think it'll be complete, but it'll be very broad and cover everything from academia to standards bodies to the industry itself to subject matter experts. Next chart. The current working group as it sits is on this chart. I won't read the names, but it is, as the other chairs have already said, quite diverse, and we think it's a very strong group. It's nice that we have both IT, telecom, and also governmental entities and users of the system. So we think we have all the bases identified, and we expect to get a much broader surface area as we bring in outside experts to share knowledge with us. But the actual working group looks to be sufficiently diverse to, really analyze this problem and come up with a set of appropriate, consensus-based recommendations. Next chart. We have a number of alternates that have already been established, and we'll continue to add to them, much like the other working groups. Not much to add there. Next chart. And then the deliverable schedule, as I mentioned before, we've already kicked off with the working group. We're now gathering, organizing principles, and we're starting to create the list of SMEs and industry bodies and other experts to be invited. Again, I'd invite others to, potentially contribute to that list. We'd like it to be as comprehensive as possible. It will take probably the first half of the year to gather information, even though we'll be distilling it as we do. And then in Q2, we hopefully will have a strong outline of the framework output paper for our first paper. We do in fact have 2 papers that are deliverable over the next 2 years. And then, our real work on distilling the information we have and turning it into a first paper will happen in Q3. And our expectation is to have it collated and finalized by December 22nd. And then we get to do it all over again for the second paper, but we think we have a good plan. Next chart. All right, well, thanks very much. Open to any questions before we proceed.
Thank you, John. Very much
Thank you.
appreciate it. There don't seem to be questions. So we'll next
Actually, I
turn.
had a question is Ritwik. Can I?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, so John, in one of your slides, I think you mentioned about operational supply chain security impact. So I think Working Group 5 is also looking at that. So it'd be good to sort of collaborate on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one that came up because obviously the diversity of the technology base to virtualize things creates an an interesting supply chain. So yeah, you probably have a much more comprehensive exploration, but we should connect the two working groups so we don't duplicate. But supply chain, source of supply, and how to maintain and keep consistent the virtualized environment is a complex problem.
It's a key aspect. Right.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Anyone else? Sorry about that, Ritwik. All right.
One last thing, Nestor and John, I wanted to get your perspective on this. So basically, I really like the way that you're thinking about reliability and security, but more than that, it's also about scale, right? And making sure that standards we define have that into consideration with respect to what telecoms do, telecom providers do. And you also talked about a bunch of groups that you're looking about in terms of their labs and the results. But I know most telecom providers also have 5G labs. I'm assuming you're going to bring some of those practices that are happening within the telecoms, because I saw the representation from a study perspective, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the challenges with labs is that we're not sure exactly where they are, and we're not sure how much progress they've made. But we do know, and we mentioned in the slides, that empirical data is incredibly valuable. And so even if it's a fairly immature test environment or lab environment, gathering it, because in fact there is some, I won't say level of misrepresentation, maybe misexpectation, that we have lots of empirical data today. It would be good to get a clear answer about how much we have and how much we need. And I think between the operators labs and the various governmental labs and industry labs, maybe there's a path to have not just simulation data for security and virtualization, but actually real empirical data based on best practices. So yeah, that's going to be we expect that to be a big one. We may need some help getting identifying where the labs are, but clearly in information gathering, we'd love to hear from as many as possible.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
I hesitate to move on at this point. Is there anyone else who has a question? All right, John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to Working Group 4 with Mary and Mark, please.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. I'm Mary Boyd with Intrado. Work Group 4, myself and Mark Reddish from APCO are co-chairing this initiative. I would like to just point out this is a 911 over Wi-Fi service. This is a topic that we've seen probably the last 6 or 7 years. The Commission has focused on next generation 911 and looking at the different evolutionary paths it's taking, excuse me, from the legacy. So Wi-Fi and 911 is just another step in that direction of addressing all the opportunities that we have in advanced technologies. And I just want to say thank you again to the Commission for asking me to help co-chair one of these initiatives. Next slide, please. Just as background, in addition to what I've already said, we're supposed to look at the public safety benefits, basically cost, feasibility for Wi-Fi access points, both in an unlicensed spectrum and in environments, both whether it's just day-to-day service and also in disaster situations. The Commission sees this as actually allowing our public another opportunity in the toolbox of technologies that can access 911 and get into public safety answering points for emergency services. Next slide, please. Our objective is to look at the technical issues with a goal of promoting consensus in the Wi-Fi ecosystem to support reliable 911 service. We're going to look at both voice and text. And as I mentioned earlier, this is under normal conditions as well as disaster events that could disrupt mobile service. We're going to look at security issues as well. This is a theme with a lot of the work groups today and in the past, and it's very important that we look at security issues. We'll look at authentication, access protocols. We're going to look at what it takes to automatically activate Wi-Fi calling on eligible mobile devices. We will also be looking at 911 caller location and call routing. In most all the technologies today, the FCC has set forth regulations that require location or dispatchable location and call routing. So Wi-Fi ecosystem will also be examined. We're going to look at the missing standards, timelines, and any cost that it's going to take to implement 911 over Wi-Fi solutions. Next slide, please, sir. Like our other working groups, I think maybe this is the largest one I've seen eager to work on 911 issues with us. We have about 36 standing members. We have quite an array of backgrounds, which we need. We've had some of the companies come, have followed the trend in volunteering on these topics with Next Gen 911, and then we have new players with new technology expertise. So I'm pretty excited about the group of members that we have. I think some are probably still, reeling from the fact that we may meet every week or every other week, and they're long meetings. But we have a very large, robust group. In next slide, please. We already have our alternates identified as well. And next slide, please. So we met on December the 9th. That was our first organizational meeting. It was a very short meeting, comparatively speaking, where we just laid out the objectives of Working Group 4. Tom Breen from Secular, they have once again allowed Tom to work with us as a project management resource. He's been with us on several CSRIC initiatives now. He is a master at managing the document and document control. We will use the Addis workspace as our primary tool for tracking the contributions and editing the document. We will initially meet bi-weekly. Our report is actually not due until March of 2023, and we only have one report. Suzanne, I'm bracing myself. I suspect that could change, but for right now, we only have one deliverable for March. However, that time will get away from us quickly. So we will begin. We actually have a meeting tomorrow. Next slide, please. We have a meeting tomorrow where we're going to begin the work on our developing our use cases. We've discussed that in our first meeting. With all the use case discussions that have already been offered up, we will probably break out into sub-teams. And one of our early responsibilities is to look at that short time frame that we need to meet in terms of drafts and getting it ready to turn into the commission. Tomorrow, we're going to provide also additional training on the use of the workspace tool for the new folks who have not been with us and worked in that environment. Suzanne will reiterate the rules around alternates and subject matter experts that are brought in to assist us. Next slide. I believe that's it. Can I answer? I don't have my glasses on, guys. Do we have questions out there?
Yes.
All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I did not see it on the slides, but so I may have just missed it. But if not, I just want to emphasize that I believe the charge from the chair and our responsibilities, since this is a consumer-facing element, that this also is consistent with the user privacy and privacy concerns.
Harold, it's not on that charter, but I think that's just going to be a natural thing that we have to consider. And most of the 911 issues that I've worked on throughout my career, privacy is one area that we always discuss. And so absolutely, you are correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Other questions, please? All right, this concludes Working Group 4's overview. Thank you so much.
Mary, thank you very much. We will next go to Working Group 5 with Ritwick, please.
Yep, next slide. So I'm chairing Working Group 5 from VMware, and our charter is really to manage software and cloud services supply chain security, both the communications and the infrastructure. And the FCC liaison is Saswat Misra. Next slide. Okay, this is our charter. FCC has basically directed Working Group 5 to review the risks to service provider operations from attacks in service provider software and cloud services stacks, and also to develop mitigation strategies for these vulnerabilities. And there are a couple of reports that already exist in CSRIC 7 and 6. So we have a good amount of material that already exists that have identified certain best practices. And so it's basically asking us to recommend best practices to mitigate the risks for each of these vulnerabilities. So in the initial part of the year, next year, we are going to take a look at some of these material. We had our first meeting last Friday. It was well attended, and we got into the discussion of what the charter is and how we can move forward. Next slide. These are the objectives. These are our milestones, September 2022 and June of 2023. The first report is basically to provide best practices to improve communications supply chain security. So that's what our focus will be, most of next year. And then we will switch to more on the infrastructure and network management systems, supply chain security. Okay, next slide. We have a large group of people. I think we have 29 reps over here, and then in the next slide we have a couple of alternates already identified. So we have a good spectrum of people from all sorts of organizations. And this is my first time in the CSRIC, so I'm, depending on a lot of the folks who are very experienced in CSRIC already. So that has really helped us a lot. And then the final slide, I think. These are our deliverables and schedules. We are expecting to sort of churn out some internal working group reports. Our final report is due on 8/11, and we meet once every 2 weeks. It'll be a Friday. We're just having a doodle poll to see what the time slot is. So that's essentially what we have. Yeah. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ritwick. Next, we will turn to the final working group, Working Group 6, with Farouk and Francisco.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Suzanne. This is Francisco presenting for our group. Glad to be co-chairing this with Farouk as well. In terms of Working Group 6, we're working on leveraging the mobile device applications and firmware to enhance the wireless emergency alerts. And again, working with James Wiley as our FCC liaison. Next slide. In terms of background, the chairs directed CSRIC 8 through our working group to identify the software or functional requirements necessary to allow wireless emergency alerts via software to pull capabilities from other device applications and firmware to enhance the presentation of via alert messages. So building on the work that we've tackled over the past couple of CSRICs on VIA. For example, researchers have found that allowing VIA to leverage the mapping capabilities of popular smartphone applications can help us reduce the amount of time the public spends trying to confirm that the emergency alert is relevant to them before taking action to protect their lives and property. So that's absolutely critical. Mobile devices also often contain a suite of accessibility features that, if we leverage into VIA, could make the emergency information that VIA messages contain more accessible to individuals with access and functional needs. As we tackle diversity, equity, inclusion more robustly now in the emergency management, alerting, and public safety space, this comes at a good time as well. Next slide. In terms of our objective, is to define an API, an application programming interface that enables the mobile device capabilities that could make VIA presentation of emergency information to the public more effective, including features that are necessary to continue to secure WIA messages and to protect consumer privacy. So again, looking at the security issues that other groups are looking as well. In addition to the technical issues, CSRIC 8 should also identify any resource constraints or procedural issues that could affect the timely deployment of the API, and recommend the appropriate mitigations for that. You'll see in the graphic an example of what this end result might look like there as well. Next slide. Our deliverables right now, our timeline is to have the report on WIA application programming interface to the full group by March of 2023. Here's our list of working group members. It's a pretty robust list. For those of you that have been tracking the work of CSRIC on WIA over the past several CSRICs, you will see some of the familiar names there. So glad to have those folks back, as well as some new folks that will be contributing to this. You know, this is a more of a technical look of what happens in that world of ones and zeros to make these things possible. So a good representation here of those folks in the technical space, those folks at the practical end and the deployment of this. And so we got a pretty robust group. And on the next slide, you will see our alternate members. So already have our standing members and alternates identified as part of the group as well. Next slide. In terms of where we are now, the working group membership has been finalized, as you saw in the two previous slides. We are up and meeting. Our first call was on Tuesday, December 7th, so earlier this month. Moving forward, we're going to take a little holiday break, but then moving into bi-weekly conference calls with additional calls as needed. And thanks to Addis, we will have a document library for the contributions, our reference documents and calendar. So we're grateful for that continued partnership to be able to give us that environment to collaborate on. Next slide. So moving forward, our next step are to develop a detailed work plan. We'll be conducting those routine bi-weekly conference calls starting in January of next year. So in the next few weeks, we'll be moving full speed ahead. And the focus of those calls will be to review the existing work in the area, so laying some groundwork for the work ahead, and then develop the new recommendations, as we come up to speed on that. And of course, providing the periodic updates to the steering committee and back to the council on these calls. So next slide, but I think Susan, that's our report. Glad to answer any questions from any of the council members.
Any questions?
Yes, I do. Francisco, one question for you. The objective of these technical specifications to be published, one, but then what after that? What's the idea once we publish, this working group puts this more detailed technical requirements together?
Yeah, so one, it really provides that standard for the deployment of these things to happen more smoothly and in a timely way. The ecosystem, is fairly complex. So I think this builds on the work that's already been done. And so, one of the challenges that we really face in the systems is the complexity of that ecosystem. It not only what software do we use to alert, how does that get to our carriers and the technology there? The variety of phones that are out there, from smartphones to those legacy phones. And so the creation of these standards really will help make sure that we're moving sort of in the same path. And that really provides, I think, for us a more streamlined way to ensure that the rollout of these enhancements will be as quick as possible. We've spent a couple of years now since we had some of those standards and recommendations developed from previous CSRICs. Some of those still are not functional. A great many of them are, because at a pretty aggressive timeline, because we were able to come up with those standards and people embrace those and move them forward. So our expectation is this same model will allow us to move at a quicker pace and provide that sort of that baseline and that standard for folks moving forward for this next level of WIA.
Thank you.
Right, and Francisco, I'm sure that the report will also include, recommendations for industry as well as for the commission, and it may give us some ideas of what we should then do next, which is always a part of why we have federal advisory committees. So the reason that a federal agency puts together a federal advisory committee is to give us advice on what you think we should do and give us recommendations. So that's
Yeah,
part of it.
it's always very helpful for all of the rulemaking process to have those folks, be a part of that discussion at the start.
Great. Thank you. So at this point, Najreen, if you would like to stay on and give us your thoughts and closing remarks.
Absolutely. First of all, to the chairs, co-chairs, and the members, thank you very much for the diligence. A really good set of next steps and objectives. Thank you, first of all. Secondly, please let Billy, Bob, myself, and Suzanne know between now and the next session anything that we can assist to help moving your objectives forward. Really good set of goals. Appreciate the time, everybody.
Thank you, Nazrin. I would like to, here, I'll turn my camera back on. There we go. I would like to start by just thanking Kurian, the deputy DFO. He worked tirelessly to put the working group members together to get them cleared. It's a very onerous process, and Kurian did an excellent job. I think he said there ended up being 140 or so that folks that he had to. It might have been higher than that. Anyways, it was a very large number, and Kurian did an excellent job, and I want to thank him. It's great that the working groups have all passed go, as it were, and held their meetings and seem to be on track, which is fantastic. We will shortly release a public notice with the list of the membership of each working group. There may be 1 or 2 additions, as we do have those new 2 CSRIC 8 members that I mentioned, and they both should join at least 1 working group. And then once we've released the public notice, those working group membership lists will be on the CSRIC 8 webpage. I would like to let you all know that the next meeting is going to be on March 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if anyone's really planning ahead, I believe the 4th meeting is then on, I think it's on June 15th. Pretty sure. I need to double check. But with that, I wish you all happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. I hope you have a wonderful time and that everyone is able to be with family and friends. And I officially close the CSRIC 8 second meeting. Thank you all.
Thanks, Suzanne.